Welcome everybody to the Pass It On Network monthly 50-50 conversation series. My name is Osnat and I'll be your host today. And I'm going to be your host today partly because our co-founder Moira Allen in France has lost most of her voice, so you'll have to bear with me. And because many of you are newcomers, just a few words about on our Pass It On network. So 11 years ago, in 2013, which is 11 years, Dr. Jen Hively and Moira Allen co-founded this grassroots network of positive aging advocates everywhere. Pass It On network champions the right of older people and contributes to the adaptation of society to the challenges of longevity and the demographic shifts. The world is getting grayer. In the years since 2013, our pioneers have grown their outreach and now present in 65 countries around the world. And you know, there's so much left to do. And what we're going to do today is talk about some of these things. So just 2 weeks ago, the 14th session of the UN Open-Ended Working Group on Aging marked a very important milestones in the promotion of the protections of human rights in older age. After years, 14 years and more, of discussions and active advocacy by civil society, NGOs, and the networks like the Pass It On network. So one of these rights is the right to work, or the right not to work as you're older. Wherever you are in the world, you must have noticed that workforce policies mostly overlook the valuable experience of older adults. Their mandatory retirement age at 65 or 60 for some professions, and in many countries, the list is endless. And aging policies rarely support continued work opportunity for our growing age group, despite many older adults wanting and needing to work. As you can see, it's a clear disconnect. Well, this year, there are 64 general elections. Some of them already happened. 38 elections are left by the end of 2024. Actually, I should say 39 because France has just announced that they're going to do an impromptu general election a year earlier. And they present a political opportunity to advocate for more inclusive workforce that reflects the needs of older adults and older people with lots of experience. And it also presents an opportunity for us and for everybody else to ask candidates for their stance on employment issues that are affecting us and all older adults. We are delighted to have Janine Vanderbug, a longtime advocate for older adults and a pioneer, to join us here to explore using tools like scorecards and candidate questionnaires to hold officials accountable on these issues. Because let's face it, governments will not do anything unless we demand them to do so. So let me tell you a little bit about Janine. And she's a passionate advocate for older workers. She's a champion for public policies that support them. She has a very proven record on that. She's going to share it with us today. Janine is the co-founder of Changing the Narrative, a leading US anti-ageism initiative, and the CEO of Encore Roadmap. She writes and consults with business, media, and brands on how they can become more age-inclusive, leverage the skills of older workers, and help intergenerational teams succeed. Janine's work has earned her many awards, including, get that, Top 25 Powerful Women in Business by Colorado Women Chamber of Commerce, the MetroVision Award from Denver Regional Council on Government, Colorado Center for Aging's Public Service Award, Denver's Mayor's Diversity and Inclusion Award and the American Society on Aging 2024 Award for Success in Diminishing Ageism. And with all that, I'm passing it on to Janine to let us know how we can do it better.
Oh, so Asna, thank you so much. And thank you all for being here, including I'm looking at my friend Kelly Roberts, who actually had nominated our age-friendly workplace initiative for the Metro Vision Award. So why is this issue so important to me? Since I have been very young, my parents would have said I kind of ran around the house saying, it's not fair, it's not fair. Throughout my life, I've been very involved in political action, political campaigns, supporting things like the high-level concepts that all of you have supported in the United Nations, and also believing at the same time that all politics is local and that we can make a difference on policies that we care about through elections and through trying to influence elections. So when Osnat reached out to me and said, I wrote some sort of post, I think on LinkedIn, saying we have an opportunity now with the US national election to actually get some of this legislation that has been hanging out there past to improve the climate for older workers. Osna reached out to me and said, did you know that there are 64 elections going on across the world and whatever? So anyway, that's why I'm here to talk a little bit about it. But I want to start with how I got to this issue about we need better public policy for older workers. And it started in 2018, and you may be looking at this image and saying, why is there a picture of a buffet here? And here's how this happened. In 2018, we started changing the narrative in Colorado. It was an initiative then funded by two foundations, Rose Community Foundation and Next 50 Initiative. And we were doing workshops at that time only across the state of Colorado. I am doing a workshop in a rural community that is followed by kind of a buffet style appetizer, stay, have lunch, let us know what you thought about the workshop. And as people were leaving, there were leftovers. And I noticed that there were a number of women my age who had attended the workshop. They had sat there for 3 hours while we talked about ageism and reframing aging. And they sat there and nodded, and they had stayed for the buffet. And then they were taking the leftovers and putting them in their tote bags. And I looked at them, and they were women my age, then in, my mid-60s, their mid-60s. And I'm like, what is going on here? And of course, on one level, I was thrilled because that meant I didn't have to pack up all this food and take it somewhere after the workshop. And on the other hand, I was wondering, so I sat down with some of them and I started to hear the stories of women in their mid-60s in the US, in a rural community, not being able to find work, very much wanting and needing to work, living on very small amounts of Social Security, literally $600 and $700 a month, because like so many women, they had stepped out of the workforce to caregive for children, to caregive for older family members, and therefore less savings, no pensions, very small amounts of Social Security, and they wanted to work. And women who had held, responsible jobs. And I was like, well, this is really odd, because when I was coming through the main street to this location, there were help wanted signs everywhere. And they said they won't hire us. And I thought that was really interesting. We talked some more. They took the food home. And I couldn't help thinking about what is it that we are talking about ageism writ large, but what is it specifically about work that, especially in a climate where we have unfilled jobs, that we displace older workers and our public policies don't support them? So what was interesting to me that year, I did 42 in-person workshops across the state of Colorado. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Colorado, we're divided by mountains. I did workshops in the city. I did them in the suburban areas, in the rural areas on the western slope, across the mountains where I now live, in areas that are characterized as frontier because there are so few people. And it didn't matter where I started bringing up this issue of workplace age discrimination. And every single workshop, someone said, that thing that you're talking about, it happened to me, happened to my partner, it happened to my dad. So I started realizing how rampant this was and how ubiquitous it was. And I thought, as I have always thought throughout my life, it's not fair. We need to do something about it. Public policy ought to be addressing it. And that's where I run into. So, of course, I have been talking about ageism. And ageism, of course, the World Health Organization definition, prejudice, how people feel, stereotyping, the stereotypes we hold, how we think about people in aging, and discrimination, how we act. And I started realizing how these definitions of ageism actually showed up in the public policies. People would say things to me like, but we have age discrimination laws in the US. Shouldn't that help? And there was kind of a connotation that older people were just whining or weren't being serious. They weren't putting the right things on their resume if they didn't get a job. So what I want to talk about here, and I talk about this in a lot of my workshops, and I call it the 4 eyes of ageism. We have internalized ageism. That's the kind of ageism that we might direct against ourselves. We might say, well, I'm too old to learn or do that. Interpersonal between 2 or more people when, for example, a supervisor might decide they are not going to give an older worker an opportunity to be retrained. All of those are a result of, and I'm going to jump to that last bar, the ideological, the ideas and the cultural narrative that we have about aging, that it's all decline, that it's all bad, that older people don't have value, right? This is familiar to all of us. But what I really have learned about is how ageism is really embedded in our policies and practices and our public policies. And that's what we're really talking about today. So what I learned when I started doing this deep dive was how ageism was actually embedded in our public policies, including the public policies that were supposed to support older workers. So in the United States, we have something that is called the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. It applies to people age 40 and over. It is supposed to bar discrimination based on age. But basically, what we have, that law has been weakened by a series of court decisions. One of those court decisions being a decision by the US Supreme Court that basically said this law, even though its language mirrors language in laws against other forms of discrimination, like gender and race, for example, the burden of proof to prove age discrimination is much, much higher for age discrimination. There are a series of courts in the United States called courts of appeals who have decided that the age discrimination law does not apply to hiring. So that means that workplace age discrimination there is rampant. We'll talk more about there. The second thing that I've really discovered is the lack of funding or outreach for older adult upskilling programs. So I noticed my friend Paula Getz on this call. And what that means is that people who are running programs to upskill and retrain and place older adults, and we know, and I know the commitment of Passing On Network to lifelong learning, but very often there isn't the funding for that, even as there is funding, for example, for workforce development overall. Another thing that we've discovered about how ageism is embedded in public policy is that, and some of you may have found this, you were trying to collect data, and at Changing the Narrative, we did a survey in 2020 because we couldn't find the data on how many older people actually wanted to work. And when we were trying to champion policies that were more age inclusive for older adults, we would hear from policymakers, well, older people really don't want to work and they enjoy being retired. There was that whole narrative, right? That we're sitting on the beach and we're holding glasses of champagne and that, we are all rich and greedy and all of that kind of thing, that we don't want to work. And part of it was we don't have data. And when we did data collect, and this was limited data collection, even though it was scientifically significant, it was only for the state of Colorado. But what we learned was, in fact, older adults did want to work. We were willing to learn new things. We relished and wanted opportunities for upskilling and reskilling, but the data that was being collected in general by the government entities would have suggested the opposite. And then the other thing that we found, and this was actually how I approached it, there is such a low public understanding and will around older adult workplace issues, so that when you bring them up, as I do anywhere to anyone who will listen, people say, is that really a thing? Do older people really want to work? And so very little understanding that workplace age discrimination exists. Very little understanding, despite valiant efforts by AARP and others who have collected data, that workplace age discrimination is rampant. Very low public understanding about it, and very little public will around older adult workplace issues. I worked together with some colleagues 2 years ago, and we successfully passed in the Colorado legislature what we call an age and graduation date bill. And it was called the Job Application Fairness Act. We were successful. We got it passed. That's the good news. The bad news is what we had to endure along the way, with people just repeating myths and stereotypes about older workers. Employers should have the right to push them out. They should have the right to screen out older people. After all, older people aren't willing to learn new things. They're digitally incompetent. All of those kind of stereotypes. We got it done, but it took a lot of work. So those are kind of the things that we're facing in actual public policy. The other thing that we are facing is what Asna referred to in the introduction, that, and this is true in the US, and I suspect it is true for others of you representing other countries as well. Ageism shows up in the absence of the attention that is paid to employment of older workers. If you look at various states' aging policies, countries' aging policy, you are hard-pressed to find the issue of employment of older adults mentioned at all, never mind any kind of policy solution. When you look at employment, economic development, and workforce policy, in general, you don't find mention of older adults. It is all about investing in our younger people. Yes, we should. Investing in manufacturing, investing in industries, investing in the future of work. Yes, we should. No mention of investment of older adults, even though we know older adults want to work, older adults need to work, and older adults are a vital resource for our economies. So that's how it shows up in the absence. All of these reflect the kind of stereotypes, and remember, stereotypes are a part of ageism. They reflect these stereotypes that people have. If we believe the stereotype of decline and deterioration is affiliated with aging, why would we invest any money at all in upskilling older adults? If we believe that older adults don't want to work or don't need to work, despite all of the evidence to the contrary, why on earth would we include older adults in employment policy? And why would we include employment of older adults in our aging policy? If we believe that older adults aren't willing to learn new things, why are we going to put our workforce development funding into training older adults for the new skills that are needed in our economy? And if we believe to that us versus them narrative that older adults are taking jobs from younger people, then it makes sense when we are doing things, and I'm going to blame the US government here, like let's create a climate change corps. Great idea. Let's train up people in what they can do in the green economy. Great idea. Bad idea. Let's limit it only to younger people, right? But they're all a result of the stereotypes that we hold. So what can we do and what can we do now? So why now? Osnat basically queued up beautifully. We have a 2024 opportunity, and the 2024 opportunity is that we do have elections going on around the world. Every election is an opportunity to educate candidates, to educate the general public about our issue, and to get candidates on board of, are they going to support our issues? Are they going to support more age-inclusive public policies? Not. and we can get them on the record during elections. So why you? Why the pioneers? Well, I'm always, I knew Jan Hively through the Encore Network. And, her mantra, I think with which she started the Pass It On Network, was meaningful work, paid or unpaid, to the last breath, right? So Pioneers by Pass It On Network has a legacy of standing up for meaningful work at all ages. But the other YU, this really struck me when I was looking at who was joining the meeting. I know many of you, and I know you are the people that people turn to around the world, in your countries, in states, in your own communities. You're the people who others ask, okay, so who should I vote for in this election? What issues are important? Or if it's not election specific, you're the people who people turn to for advice on aging issues, to interpret things that they may not know about. So why you? That's why the pioneers. And that's why when Osnat called me to talk about this, I said yes, even though I never do meetings on Monday. So thank you, Osnat, for having me break my no meeting on Monday. So what I want to encourage are a couple of things that I have found are good ways of getting the public to pay attention. And really what we are talking about here is getting candidates and the public to pay attention through our issues, and using something as simple as candidate questionnaires during an election process, and then scorecards after the election and when people are to vote, are a really powerful way that not only I have found are effective in getting people to pay attention to our issues, but we know that have been very successful in women's rights, reproductive rights, climate change, around a number of issues. We haven't used them enough as part of as aging advocates. We haven't used them enough. And I think the call to action that I'm asking all of you to think about is to do this now. So the process basically comes within your own group, identifying what are those key issues. So obviously my key issue is workplace age discrimination and having more favorable policies to address them. Then creating and distributing candidate questionnaires. Depending on the location you're in, there are a lot of rules around it to make sure that you're not violating the laws, but you are generally safe when you distribute candidates, you distribute questionnaires to everyone who is running. So not just to your select candidate, you distribute to everyone who's running, and then you have a mechanism for making sure that you're sharing everyone's responses, including lack of responses. And typically what I like to do is share them on websites. If you have a newsletter, sharing them depending on the size of your community, sharing them in, more broad media and that kind of thing. But basically you're identifying the issues, you turn them into questions, share and publicize the results. So I want to share with you the sample candidate questionnaire that I've put together for the United States federal election that is coming up in November. We know there are a lot of things. We're not going to talk about all those other things. These are specifically the things that are related to older adult employment. And if any of you are interested in doing this, I'm currently contacting organizations to see who wants to distribute this to candidates in your own communities. And this would include candidates for the U.S. Senate or U.S. congressional offices. Question number 1, do you support the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act? What that will do is reverse the effect of the Supreme Court decision, and it will mean that older people don't have a higher burden of proof to prove age discrimination as opposed to. This question is important. This bill has been introduced into the U.S. Congress 3 different times, and then it sits there and it sits there. There's a lack of action. I want to see people elected who are going to support this. Do you support the Protect Older Job Applicants Act? As I mentioned before, as a result of some court decisions in a number of jurisdictions, the Age Discrimination of Employment Act does not apply to hiring. I want to know that people are going to support this, which would clarify that it is a matter of U.S. law that the Age Discrimination of Employment Act does apply, in fact, to hiring. I want to know, do people support legislation to ensure funding for upskilling older workers? Right now, there is a lot of workforce development funding in the United States, but it is not specifically directed to older workers. And very often, because of how outreach is done and marketing of these programs is done, older workers actually don't know that these resources are available to them. There is a specific kind of legislation right now called the Senior Community Service Employment Act. I want to know if people support increased funding for this particular piece of legislation, or whether they are part of a group of people who have tried to defund this year after year. This particular legislation targets the lowest income, the most underserved populations. And then I want to know, have candidates actually thought about this issue at all? And I want to know, do they have other ideas? So these first 4 questions are basically yes or no. You support this or you don't. And then from that, I can create a scorecard after it. But I also want to know what other ideas that they have. These are my issues, but I also want to know this same format, this same process can be used. Aging is everyone's issue. It can be adapted to other issues, whether it's on a state level, a community level, other countries. You can adapt the same process. You identify what are the issues, you develop the questions, you distribute them broadly. You can use them, whether it's caregiving, healthcare, social isolation, whatever issues you're working on, you can use the same. And I think, Osna, I'm supposed to turn this back to you, and there are questions, right, for our for this group. And what I would love to know, as you're having your discussions, is what are the issues that you want to tackle, and what questions would you ask? So those are kind of mine. And then I've got just a connection slide. I'm also going to put a link in the chat. If any of you are interested in getting a copy of my basically candidate questionnaire for candidates for U.S. federal office, you can just fill out the form that's at that first link, and I'll put it in the chat, and I will send it to you. And then you can add to it, you can make it your own, you can put your own logo on it, whatever it is. The important thing is that we are amassing a group of people who are willing to talk about this. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Janine. I kept writing and writing and writing all the questions, and you kept answering them. There's some questions in the chat, but I have 2 thoughts. Cynthia, we're going to come back to you and to everybody else, but there was so much here. And the last call to action that you stated here, Janine, is what's going to be on your scorecard for your local candidates? This is the question I'd like to just send to all of you, and let's just go to small breakout rooms for 12 minutes and try to talk about it, and then we'll come back, we can talk about everything else and that too. I'm putting in the chat that question. Think about your local election scorecard. What items would be on it?
Okay, I'd love to raise a response. And first of all, I had a great opportunity meeting Borchetta, and she's at the local and I'm at the global level at the UN. And Janine, I really appreciated your perspective. It really was so helpful. And for me, those questions are really the kind of thing I've been working on with national elections. Although many national elections actually start with the school board elections, and then they go to this. In New York State, it's a direct path. You run for the local school board, then you run for statewide office, then district or whatever, and then statewide office, and then you're headed off to Congress. So my concern is you've raised a very important one about the workplace, but all the various areas that you identified of age discrimination and where we need to work are all part of the human rights of older persons across the lifespan. Mm-hmm. And it's, as we talked about, or Osna talked about at the beginning, the open-ended working group. We've been advocating at the United Nations with member states, and I've been trying to do that more locally with our country, US. And in fact, your new CEO of Next 50, Peter Caldas was part of that US coalition that began working with me on trying to influence the US government to take more leadership on seeking a legally binding document, a convention for the human rights. So I see us really, the questions on my would be at the state and national level offices saying, will you support the work of the open-ended working group to now pursue a legally binding document? And as I was saying to Borchetta, I was hoping that we could get as far as influencing them between now and the General Assembly that meets in September to take action on the open-ended working group that just concluded in May, to refer it to the Human Rights Council to really begin, they wouldn't begin drafting yet, but they'd begin identifying the elements that would need to be included that don't exist in other human rights documents. So that's, and I'll let Borchetta, if she had anything to add more on the local level, but for her running a county office, it really affects local. Yeah, so I will stop, but that was my concern about everything you raised is really part of protecting the human rights of older persons across the lifespan.
And this is Lisa Borchetta. I'm the person that met with Cynthia. And I just want to add that it was interesting to see how the same issues show up on both local levels and national, international levels, and how the conversations, even though they're at these different levels, are very much the same. And it's the same kind of almost a grassroots starting kind of at a fundamental understanding that you build on. And that was nice to see, and a great conversation and connection.
Thank you. Tom, you're next.
Joyce Cohen and I had an interesting conversation. There was a third person, but they never, either they weren't at their station or something. And Janine, you've nailed to the wall the content from the standpoint of strategic thinking and the content issues that really need to be addressed. And what Joyce and I think, sort of agreed on and thought, how do you get that operational? What are the tactics? And that immediately runs into, in the US particularly, the whole issue of partisanship, which is driving our democracy into the ground. And of course, we don't have a solution, but in our conversation, we talked about the fact each of the elements that you raised has and can be proposed and discussed in a context that would have appeal across the right side of the spectrum and the left side of the spectrum. But the question is how to do that. And unfortunately, the only thing we came up with is something that doesn't seem to be working at all in the United States. And that is bringing people together, talking with our representatives and so forth, and writing letters that can drive critical thinking about the issues, where people will be willing to lay the issues on the table, recognize their own partisanship, and then try to recognize the common value of what's being discussed to each of them and their cause individually. And Janine, with your expertise, I'll leave that problem to you.
Wait a minute. Hold on. I was under the impression this was a joint problem-solving body. So that's not how I'm going to look. No, but I will say this. What I've discovered, and so I want to say some of the things that we've successfully, and this is within the state of Colorado, have done. We got an age and graduation date bill that bans employers from asking age or graduation dates on initial job applications. We did get a bill passed 2 years ago to strengthen age discrimination laws on a state level to basically overcome the problem that we have at the federal level. So I will say, and I agree with you, Tom, these actually are bipartisan issues. They're a way, we can talk about the economy and how pushing out older workers actually has a negative impact on communities and businesses and the economy, and that appeals to some people. And we can also talk about, the unfairness of it. I mean, there are this would be a much longer session, but I am happy, let's talk, reach out. And if there are a group of people who want to continue this conversation about tactics, I think sharing tactics is really, really important. And I also believe it can be done. This in particular is a bipartisan issue, but we are the leaders we've been waiting for. We need to bring it to the fore.
I agree with everything you just said, but if you've been successful in that, you must have been able to address the partisanship that creates, if you look at it, and I'm sorry, I'm left leaning, but I respect the right in terms of what used to be called conservatism. They have ideas, and so forth, but there's an outright rejection, and you see people saying one thing 1 minute and then they'll turn right around for whatever reasons and say the opposite thing 10 minutes later for whatever purposes they have. Joyce, you want to add to this so I don't muddle it all up?
No, I think you're right on, but I just saw what Isaac put on the chat and it relates to our conversation. So I'm just going to defer because it's that juxtaposition of let's come to the table and now what? And so Isaac, take it away.
Hello, everyone. So, what I wrote there, is that, which came up in our group as well when we were speaking, was how can it be that many different facets of our communities and the context that we've created within our societies, how can it be that we are celebrating longevity, right? That, there are many, it's everywhere, right? In the media, you see how, like in commercials, celebrating longevity, like living longer lives. But, taking within the context of, especially what we've been talking about now with ageism and, the entire, just the vast, unfortunate hand that ageism plays in many, many, many different contexts. Are we really in a place to celebrate it, I guess? Because we're not actually doing, we're not actually giving ourselves the grace and the justice to merit that celebration, right? And I think, based on how we feel about that or what we think about it, we might get a better idea as to how did we end up in this situation in the first place, right? Because, I am very young. I'm 23 years old, and I being in these conversations and thinking about, what the world might look like when I'm older and I'm transitioning out of my career, moving afterwards. What would that look like? Would we be in the same place as before? Would we still be celebrating longevity but failing to actually look after each other, for those of us who are living longer lives? So, yeah.
Thank you. That's perfect.
I think this was a really clear mirror that you held in front of all of us. And I guess one of the questions is, how can we hold this mirror very clearly and practically to the people who actually make decisions about policies and laws and everything else?
Can we ask Margaret? Margaret just put a really, I would have said the exactly same thing, but Margaret, do you want to speak to what you just put in the chat?
So I'm going to read what Margaret said.
Okay.
Margaret said, in New Hampshire, we tend to use a bird dogging approach intended to gain verbal commitment from politicians on specific issues, as in what they will do to address issue X. In public setting, these commitments are recorded and tend to hold people to their word.
Mm-hmm. It's a great tactic.
Yeah, one practical solution. I can't escape the noticing that most of us here are from North America, with the exception of a couple of people from Europe, like Anne and Jackie, you're in Vienna. Can you, the risking of putting you on the spot, can you maybe suggest to us some perspectives from where you are on your landscape there? I think that political opposites and polarities exist everywhere. We're seeing it now in Europe with the European Parliament elections. So there's nothing that is very specific to the US. Maybe Jackie, maybe you have a suggestion, observation.
Yeah, we just had the elections, and the whole trend of the far right is really increasing, unfortunately. But listening to the talk today, maybe because although I've been living in Austria for over 50 years, I don't know how I could really get politicians to stick to some things that they promise, because they never even answer questions when they're in an interview. And it's the same in the States. You don't get an answer to your question, and so it's difficult. So I don't know. I think it's probably different in the States. So I really don't have much to add to that. I'm very sad about the increase in far right here in Austria. Yeah, I hope that something will happen also in the United States to stop it. Yeah.
Verna, before we go to you, I just want to, I've been seeing in the chat from the person who goes by the initials SC, asked a couple of times, how do we make sure candidates keep their promises? I want to hang that question here. We'll listen to Verna, and then maybe we can answer that question. Or maybe SC can answer that question too. So Verna, over to you, and then we can come back to that.
Hi, everybody. A couple things. One is I was in the room with Carol, and we were saying we're not really politically involved, except we feel our vote is very important. But we're so disturbed by the political situation that we're looking at a group. You know, we were saying it's hard to do it alone, but if there's a group that we can connect to. So I think while many of us are deeply disturbed by what's going on politically, it's an opportunity to grab those people who, for the first time in their life, really are ready to get politically involved. The other thing that, to go on another tangent, is Isaac, man, I'm nominating you for the mover and shaker for in the elder field. I want to see you rise up. I think you're great. I wanted to give a quick example of what he was saying. I was talking to a young pre-med student, and I've been involved in aging for 10 years. I speak nationally and internationally. And he said to me, what was the best time in your life? And I said, now. And he laughed and he said, no, really, when was the best time? When was the best time in your life? And I said, I've had a long and wonderful life, but this is the best. And he was stunned. I mean, there was nothing in his education that prepared him for the fact that I was in anything but decline. And I think that education has got to begin, because we need to connect with these young people, such as Isaac, and really make some change. Thank you.
Thanks, Verna. That goes back to the proverb that the best time to dig a well is before you're thirsty.
Yeah.
Anne, will go over to you now.
In the Netherlands, the situation is different than in the States. And one of the reasons is that we have a very good social security system. So so financially there is not really a absolute need to work till you die. And
You're okay.
And another thing is that there is a large shortage of the workforce. So that's the reason that people like older people that have experience to work for them. And we have here in the politics, we have 15 parties. And one of the parties is just for the elderly. And they are also fighting for pension, for retirement. Now, I think retirement is a dirty word. We should not use retirement, but we should use refirement. So stimulate the people to work. And I have a good experience in retirement because I've worked for 31 years at IBM, but I am also now retired for 31 years. And I found that my age is a unique selling point. So I like to stop now.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, age is a unique selling point. I just maybe want to throw in an observation is that 5 years from now, 5 years ago, we were not able to have this conversation and not able to see that visibility of aging rights and aging workforce in any public discourse. And for me, that points out that something is changing, that employers and workers are going to find their voice in a way that they have to. It's not a question of nice to have. And we're going to see older workers coming back to the workforce because the workforce needs them. So that's my little observation. And we can go back to maybe, how can we make our elected officials stand behind their words? Can we ensure this? Doug, I think you have a unique experience there in your town. Maybe
Yes.
you can share some of this
Yeah, yeah, we only hire older workers. Our average age is between 65 and 75. So we're very fond. I tell everybody, I said, look, your workforce is growing at single digits at best. Mine growing at double digits. So, I'm going to be in a much better position than you 5 years from now. You have to start thinking a little more practically. But I also think that part of it is education. Part of ageism is being invisible. And I think we are largely invisible to policymakers, even people, if they are well-meaning, find us invisible. I have a couple of examples of that. I won't go into them, but I think we do need to really educate folks. I mean, I live in a town of 10,000 people, and when I'm the chairperson of our Council on Aging here and going through the funding efforts every year, I found there's a huge increase from in 2010, we had 1,300 people over 65 in our community. In 2020, we had 2,300 people in our community. And you know what? Nobody in town government really knew that. And I was totally surprised. That's 23% of our population, which by state averages is going to grow at more than 30%. 1,200 students in grades K through 8. Think about that. Think about that. And that population is not going to be growing at single digits. So it's when I brought to the town select board, the town manager saying, we have a real issues that we're going to be dealing with, and we need to start dealing with them now. How do we plan for capital expenditures? We don't know even what the the makeup of the town is like. And I found that through town after town. People don't know how big an issue this really is and what the consequences are going to be from not facing it. I don't think I can prescribe what they should be doing, but I think they need to be aware of really how critical it is, and that there's not really a lot of time left. It's not like climate change when the predictions can vary a lot. You've got a fixed population. It's pretty predictable how many people from 70 are going to be 80 in 10 years, how many 80-year-olds are going to be 90 in another 10 years. It's not that hard, and there's going to be a lot. What are you going to do about it? So I think part of it is education. We have our town meeting is how we run our town, and a lot of towns in Massachusetts, and I think throughout the country do this. And I said, our last town meeting ended up being about 150 people. And I said to some of the others, so we might put some programs and, some things out there. And I guarantee you, I'll get 200 seniors here on town meeting day. We have a lot of political power, but we're just not organized enough to really use it yet. I think that's part on us too. If you want to be in the politics, start at the local level. Start seeing how much power you really can exert at this level, and get people aware, because they're gonna bring it up to the state level, etc.
Well, thank you, Doug. These were powerful words, and you can see that there are many ways to approach this issue. And believe it or not, we're just about almost done with our formal time. So here are a few things that are going to happen. I'm going to, in a second, I'm going to return the microphone to Janine to bookend this conversation. After this, I'm going to tell you what's happening next month. And after this, we'll keep the conversation open for another 15 minutes for any other thing that did not get said until now. So Janine, over to you.
You bet. So a couple of things I want to summarize, and this is perfect, piggybacking off what Doug just said. And I love that he's got that Buzzards Bay on back of him. I grew up in New Bedford, Massachusetts. So I'm like, got to check this out next time I'm there. We need to know the numbers, and we need to make sure this all goes within the broad category of how do we hold people accountable. We need to know the numbers in our own communities, in our own state, in our own country. People know generally, writ large, that older voters vote, and they know, elected officials and candidates know that older voters show up to more elections, have a higher voter participation rate. But this is where it is on us. We need to make sure we're making ourselves visible on the issues like this that we care about and that affect those and those that we know. I know in my own work, one of the barriers to making older adults visible, specifically on the issue of workplace age discrimination, I hear from hundreds of people literally every week about their stories of workplace age discrimination. And then I say, are you willing to show up at here, here, here? And if you are still in the job market, if you're still slogging away trying to get that job, you are not showing up to testify. There is stigma attached and that kind of thing. So we need to normalize it's okay. And those of us, I'm more secure in this realm because I work for myself. So the only person who's going to discriminate against me based on my age is me, and I'm not going to do that. So I'm okay. But those of us who are okay in some space need to be willing to go and stand up, make this an issue. So candidate questionnaires are a way to do it. People said, how do we hold people accountable? We get the questionnaires not only out there, we do the follow-up, we publish the questionnaires, we let people know. Margaret's suggestion of we get people on the record. We present the candidate questionnaires at candidate forums. We let people know that we are doing this. the more specific our questions are. So yes, we want to support the high level. We are against workplace age discrimination. We support human rights of older people, but we want to be very specific. Will you support this policy or not? Get people on the record. That is what changes behavior. And then when people actually support us, before they have a chance to retract, we celebrate them. We are everywhere saying, thank you so much, Senator this, Congresswoman this, for supporting XYZ. And we're letting them know in media, social media, events, thank you dinners, whatever it is that you have going on, we're thanking them for the positions they've taken. We're making it really hard for people to back out. This can be done. It's hard. We are the leaders that we've been waiting for. No one else is going to do this for us. Like if we don't stand up, it's not like there's some cavalry out there. It's us. So we've got to do it. That's my belief. I am happy to help anytime. If anybody wants to have further conversations, just message me. I'm going to put the link in my in the chat again to anyone who basically, I think this is the link to the chat. If you, I'm basically compiling, I've got the existing candidate questionnaire and I'm adding some of the great questions that I heard come up here to it. And I'll email it out to people who kind of fill out that form with the link in the chat. So that's it. I don't know, Osnat, is that what you were expecting? Anything else you want me to say?
Oh my God, I wanted to stay for another 2 hours and continue to talk about it, but this was great. I think this was a sampler. The rest is in our hands. I want to thank Janine for getting us excited again around this and giving us some ideas about how to make it practical. And I just wanted to turn your attention to our July 8th conversation. It's definitely worth coming to, just like this one was. We're hosting Dr. Sarah Zeff Geber, and she's an author and expert authority on solo aging. And solo aging are people who age without family support, who do not have children, or children are away, or family is away, and it's all on them. Another example of how to use your agency and self-sufficiency and creating the network you need. And she's going to speak about the challenges that face people like that, people who do not have any familial support as you age. So join us. The invitation is going to be in your mail in a few days. That's July 8th, same time, same place, new link. And that's it. This is our formal ending. At this point, we're wishing Moira good recovery and return of her voice. And I'm going to keep this conversation open for another 15 minutes to talk about everything else that has to do with this topic.